This book is not a historical record, nor is it a work of scholarship in the traditional sense. It is an imaginative exercise, a hypothetical courtroom drama in which the enduring claims of Jesus Christ's historicity and divinity are placed on trial. For 2 millennia, these claims have provoked wonder, devotion, debate, and outright rejection. Historians, theologians, scientists, philosophers, and ordinary seekers have weighed the evidence and reached vastly different conclusions. Some see in the life, death, and reported resurrection of Jesus the pivotal moment of human history. Others see legend, myth, or sincere but mistaken belief. Rather than add yet another voice to the endless chorus of assertion and counter-assertion, I have chosen a different path, to let the primary voices speak for themselves within the structured theater of a trial. Ancient witnesses, prophets, apostles, and even critics from the first centuries, are summoned alongside modern scholars who have devoted their lives to studying the available evidence. Both prosecution and defense are given full opportunity to present their case. The reader will notice that no verdict is forced. The judge's final ruling reflects what rigorous historical inquiry can and cannot establish with certainty. Beyond that threshold lies a question each person must answer alone, not merely did it happen? But what does it mean for me? My hope is that this dramatic presentation will honor the seriousness of the question while making the arguments accessible and engaging. Whether you approach these pages as a convinced believer, a curious skeptic, or someone standing somewhere in between, I invite you to sit in the jury box, listen carefully to the testimony, and reach your own conclusion. The trial is called to order. Once upon a time, in a grand and historic courthouse where the sun glinted off stone columns like beacons of unyielding truth, an extraordinary trial unfolded with the weight of eternity hanging in the balance. The building loomed like a sentinel of justice, its flags whipping fiercely in the gusty wind, as a restless crowd surged outside, historians in rumpled tweed jackets furiously scribbling notes, theologians gripping worn Bibles like lifelines, skeptics with arms crossed in defiant doubt, and believers with eyes ablaze in fervent hope. Reporters jabbed microphones into the fray, cameras flashing like lightning strikes, while a news anchor's voice cut through the chaos. Today, in this unprecedented hypothetical trial, the claims of Jesus Christ's historicity and divinity face the ultimate test. Will faith stand tall, or will doubt shatter it all? Inside, the courtroom throbbed with electric anticipation, the air thick with the scent of polished oak and nervous sweat. Polished wooden benches groaned under the shifting weight of observers, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of bees. Sunbeams pierced through towering arched windows, casting dramatic shafts of light that danced with swirling dust motes, as if ancient spirits had gathered to bear witness. The American flag and state seal stood sentinel beside the elevated judge's bench, where clerks rustled papers with frantic urgency. Suddenly, the bailiff, a colossal figure with a voice like rolling thunder, stepped forward, his boots echoing ominously. The judge, a 60-year-old man with silver hair streaked like wisdom's crown and a gaze sharp enough to pierce souls, entered with deliberate, commanding strides. His gavel slammed down with a crack that echoed like a divine decree, instantly silencing the room's murmurs to a breathless hush. The bailiff's voice boomed with unshakable authority, vibrating through the chamber. All rise. The Honorable Judge Elias Thorne presiding in the case of the people versus the claims of Jesus Christ's historicity and divinity. The courtroom erupted in a chaotic rustle of clothing and scraping feet as everyone surged to attention. The judge ascended the bench like a king claiming his throne, adjusted his glasses with a deliberate flick that betrayed his thoughtful intensity, and seated himself with a nod that commanded obedience. His voice resonated deep and commanding, sweeping the room like a wave. Be seated. This is no ordinary proceeding. We plunge into the shadowed annals of history, the turbulent depths of faith, the unyielding rigors of science, and the soaring heights of philosophy. No verdict here will chain the world, but it may ignite minds or shatter illusions. Counsel, are you prepared? The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, clad in an impeccably tailored suit that screamed precision, locked eyes with the judge, her piercing gaze slicing through any facade like a scalpel. She nodded firmly, her posture radiating unyielding resolve. The prosecution is ready, Your Honor. The defense attorney, a passionate man in his 50s, his tie knotted with fierce tightness, eyes burning like coals of conviction, and a subtle cross pin glinting on his lapel like a badge of faith, stood resolute, his fists clenched at his sides. The defense is ready, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space. Proceed with opening statements. Prosecution first. The prosecutor rose with fluid grace, buttoning her jacket with a sharp snap that echoed like a gauntlet thrown down, and strode to the center, her heels clicking against the marble floor like impending judgments. She faced the judge, her gestures slicing the air with controlled fury, her voice steady at first but building to a passionate crescendo that made the room's air feel heavier. Your Honor, shadows of doubt loom large over these extraordinary claims, choking the light of reason. A virgin birth that reeks of ancient myths recycled? Miracles that brazenly defy the iron laws of nature? A man crucified, his body broken and lifeless, then rising as God incarnate? We will rip open the contradictions in these ancient texts, scribed decades later by biased, trembling hands, infested with inconsistencies in births, tangled genealogies, and fantastical resurrections. Prophecies mangled and twisted to fit like jagged puzzle pieces forced into unwilling shapes. Miracles? Nothing but faded echoes of pagan legends, bloated and embellished through the fog of time. The crucifixion? Historical, perhaps, the gruesome end of a failed rebel, not some cosmic divine sacrifice. The empty tomb? A convenient late addition, glaringly absent in the earliest, raw accounts. Appearances? Mere illusions born of raw grief, the mind's frantic clutch at vanishing hope. Disciples transformed? Sincere delusions, history brims with martyrs who bled for lies they believed as truth. The Shroud of Turin? A contested relic, carbon dated to medieval forgery, its ghostly image possibly the work of an artist's cunning hand or some natural quirk, not the radiant imprint of resurrection. And the Kalam cosmological argument? A fragile philosophical house of cards, crumbling under the weight of quantum realities and cosmic models that spark without needing a divine flint. We demand evidence that matches the colossal magnitude of these claims. Will you swallow ancient hearsay and wild speculation? Or stand firm with reason, history, and science? These are fables forged in the blistering fires of blind faith, not forged facts. Rule them unproven, cast them into the abyss of myth. She pivoted sharply, returning to her seat with a satisfied nod to her notes, the courtroom erupting in a low murmur that rippled like a storm gathering force. The defense attorney surged to his feet, gripping the table's edge so tightly his knuckles whitened, his voice exploding like a clarion call that sent shivers through the crowd, his broad gestures invoking the thunderous weight of history. Your Honor, light pierces the veil of skepticism with blinding force. The evidence assembles like a divine mosaic, prophecies carved centuries before, etched in stone and fulfilled in one extraordinary life. Eyewitnesses, apostles with fire in their veins, historians with impartial quills, testify to his existence, his awe-inspiring miracles, his agonizing death, and his triumphant conquest over the grave. Jesus lived, boldly claimed divinity, mended the shattered and sick, and rose, transmuting utter despair into defiant victory, turning quivering cowards into unyielding conquerors. The empty tomb stands unchallenged, a yawning void where no body was ever dragged forth to silence the claims. Appearances to hundreds, even hardened skeptics shattered and converted in an instant. The shroud whispers forbidden secrets, blood from unimaginable torment, an image seared by energy beyond mortal comprehension, resurrection's thunderous echo. The Kalam argument seals the unshakable foundation. A universe with an explosive beginning demands a timeless creator, rendering miracles not madness, but the natural outpouring of divine power. Skeptics hurl mere shadows, legends spun from thin air, hallucinations that evaporate under scrutiny, utterly failing to explain the cataclysmic explosion of faith that reshaped empires. History demands a verdict, and it roars like thunder. Jesus is Lord, divine Son, risen Savior. Affirm the truth that bent the very arc of humanity, or let doubt blind you to the dawn. The judge nodded thoughtfully, his gavel tapping lightly but firmly for silence, the sound cutting through the rising tension like a blade, compelling openings, raw and riveting. Defense, call your first witness. The courtroom leaned forward in unison, a collective breath held taut, hearts pounding as the drama unfolded. Chapter 1, the words spoken long ago, pre-existence and prophecies, before birth. The defense attorney rose with a dramatic flourish. Your Honor, the defense calls the prophet Isaiah. The heavy doors creaked open with a prolonged, eerie groan that reverberated through the hushed chamber like the reluctant unveiling of forgotten secrets from antiquity. A stunned silence fell as Isaiah entered, an imposing, majestic figure in flowing earthen robes that swirled like desert winds, his long white beard cascading like a prophet's mantle, staff thumping rhythmically against the marble floor with each authoritative step. He advanced like a living vision summoned from the dust of history, his piercing eyes scanning the courtroom as if judging the souls assembled. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the crowd, believers leaned forward in awe, skeptics shifted uncomfortably with folded arms, while historians scribbled frantically. The bailiff, momentarily frozen, approached with wide eyes, extending an ancient-looking scroll for the oath, his voice cracking slightly in the charged air. The bailiff cleared his throat, voice booming to regain control. Place your hand on the scroll. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help you God? Isaiah placed his weathered hand firmly on the scroll, his voice deep and resonant, echoing like thunder from Mount Sinai. I do, as the Lord lives, I speak only what he has revealed. He ascended the witness stand with dignified poise, settling into the modern chair that seemed comically out of place beneath his ancient form. The defense attorney approached slowly, voice laced with reverence. Prophet Isaiah, please state your credentials for the record. Isaiah leaned toward the microphone, his eyes distant yet fiery, as if gazing into visions anew. I am Isaiah, son of Amoz, called by the Lord in the year King Uzziah died. I prophesied in Jerusalem from 740 to 700 BC, serving under kings Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. In a vision, seraphim touched my lips with burning coal, cleansing me to speak his words. My scroll records divine oracles of judgment, hope, and the coming Messiah, words that have endured through empires' rise and fall. The defense attorney pressed on, voice building excitement. What do your writings foretell about this Messiah? Isaiah's voice rose with passionate intensity, gesturing broadly as if proclaiming to ancient kings, the courtroom hanging on every word. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. Isaiah 7:14. This sign was given to faithless Ahaz, a miraculous birth proving God's presence amid threats from Assyria and Israel. Yet it echoes farther, a child born of divine promise, Emmanuel, God incarnate among his people. He paused, the crowd breathless, then continued with grave solemnity, and in chapter 53, the suffering servant, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, and familiar with pain. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities, the punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 53:3-5. This servant, innocent yet silent as a lamb to slaughter, bears the sins of many, redeeming through vicarious suffering, a sacrificial atonement foreshadowing the ultimate Savior. The courtroom fell silent, some spectators nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. The courtroom erupted, believers nodding tearfully, skeptics whispering doubts, as sunbeams illuminated swirling dust like divine approval. The prosecutor surged forward for cross-examination, her heels clicking sharply, eyes narrowing like daggers, voice laced with skepticism. Prophet Isaiah, isn't virgin a mistranslation? The Hebrew Alma, meaning young woman, means merely young woman, not implying miraculous birth. And wasn't this about a child in your own time, to reassure Ahaz, not some distant future figure? Isaiah met her gaze unflinchingly, voice steady as bedrock. The word Alma denotes a young woman of marriageable age, untouched, fitting the sign's wonder. The Greek Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, widely used by Jews in Jesus' era, translated centuries before Jesus and used widely in his era, renders it Parthenos, Greek for virgin, explicitly virgin. The prophecy unfolds in layers, an immediate encouragement in my day, yet ultimate fulfillment in the Messiah's miraculous birth. God speaks with dual horizons, near and far, to reveal his eternal plan. The prosecutor pressed harder, flipping notes aggressively, and Isaiah 53? Many scholars say the servant is Israel collectively, suffering in exile, not an individual divine figure. Isaiah's eyes flashed with prophetic fire. The servant songs distinguish, sometimes Israel, yet here singular, one man who intercedes for the nation's sins, innocent while the guilty go free. His vicarious suffering brings justification to many, pointing beyond collective woe to a personal Redeemer. The prosecutor arched an eyebrow sharply. No further questions. She returned to her seat amid rising murmurs. The judge interjected calmly, "The witness is excused." Isaiah rose majestically, staff thumping as he exited, leaving a profound hush, the weight of ancient words lingering like incense. The defense attorney consulted notes, then stood, but the prosecutor interjected swiftly. The prosecutor turned sharply to the judge, her voice cutting through the lingering reverence like a blade. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Dr. Bart Ehrman." The doors swung open again with a resounding thud that echoed off the walls, snapping the courtroom back to the present. Dr. Bart Ehrman entered, a bespectacled academic in a rumpled tweed jacket that spoke of countless hours in dusty libraries, carrying a towering stack of books under one arm. He walked in with measured, deliberate steps, his expression calm yet carrying a subtle weariness, as if burdened by the truths he'd unearthed. Whispers surged through the crowd, skeptics leaned forward eagerly, believers shifted uneasily, and theologians clutched their Bibles tighter. The bailiff, regaining composure after the prophet's ethereal presence, approached with a modern Bible edition, his hand steady but the air thick with anticipation. The bailiff intoned solemnly, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Dr. Bart Ehrman placed his hand on the Bible, his voice steady and professorial. "I do." He sat in the witness chair, adjusting his glasses with a thoughtful push, the lenses glinting under the courtroom lights like windows to scholarly scrutiny. The stack of books thudded softly on the stand beside him, their spines facing the room, prominent titles like Misquoting Jesus and How Jesus Became God drawing murmurs from the observers. The prosecutor approached with confident strides, her tone probing yet respectful. "Dr. Ehrman, please state your credentials." Dr. Bart Ehrman leaned slightly forward, calm and professorial, with a hint of weariness in his eyes as if reliving years of rigorous debate. "I am the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, with a doctorate from Princeton Theological Seminary. I've authored over 30 books on the New Testament and early Christianity, including bestsellers like Misquoting Jesus and How Jesus Became God, works that examine textual variants, historical contexts, and the evolution of Christian beliefs." The prosecutor nodded, gesturing toward the ancient scroll from Isaiah's testimony still visible on a side table. "Are these Old Testament prophecies solid evidence of Jesus' divinity?" Dr. Bart Ehrman leaned forward more intently, gesturing to his books with a sweep of his hand, his voice measured but firm, carrying the weight of academic rigor. "No. They are often vague and rooted in their original historical context. For example, Isaiah 53 likely refers to the suffering of the nation of Israel collectively, not a single individual Messiah. In the original context, the servant songs in Isaiah described Israel's collective experiences of exile and restoration under Babylonian rule, not a future divine figure. Ideas of pre-existence, the idea that Jesus existed with God before his earthly birth, like in the Gospel of John, are later theological developments, absent in earlier accounts such as Mark's Gospel, a concept that evolved in Christian thought over time as believers grappled with Jesus' identity. The courtroom murmured audibly, some heads nodded in thoughtful agreement, others shook in vehement dissent, the tension palpable as faith clashed with scholarship. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, standing tall and unyielding, his voice steady but edged with challenge. Dr. Ehrman, even in your works, you affirm that Jesus existed as a historical figure and had a reputation as a miracle worker. Doesn't the alignment of these prophecies with his life suggest something more than coincidence? Dr. Bart Ehrman paused, choosing his words carefully, his fingers tapping lightly on his book stack as he met the attorney's gaze. A reputation as a charismatic healer, yes, but that's common in ancient times, from Apollonius of Tyana to other wandering sages. The prophecies were retrofitted by early Christians to fit Jesus' story, not predictive fulfillments. Retrofitting means reinterpreting old texts to match new events, a common practice in religious movements seeking to validate their claims. The defense attorney pressed briefly, then relented, no further questions. Dr. Bart Ehrman gathered his books with a quiet rustle, exiting amid a wave of whispers from the crowd, some admiring his intellect, others debating his conclusions. The judge's gavel tapped lightly, restoring order. The judge, the witness is excused. The defense attorney consulted notes, then stood, the courtroom's energy shifting once more. Chapter 2, The Child is Born, Birth, circa 4 to 6 BC. The defense attorney rose with renewed vigor, his voice ringing clear amid the lingering echoes of scholarly debate. Your Honor, the defense calls Matthew the Apostle. The heavy doors groaned open once more, the sound deep and resonant like the turning of ancient history's pages. Matthew entered, a humble man in a simple, weathered tunic of coarse linen, a rolled scroll tucked securely under his arm like a treasured relic. His steps were quiet and unassuming, his posture bowed with genuine humility, yet his eyes shone with the earnest fire of one who had witnessed the divine. The courtroom stirred, believers gazed in reverent awe, imagining a direct link to the Savior. Skeptics exchanged skeptical glances, historians leaned forward, pens poised. The bailiff approached solemnly, extending the oath book, the air thick with the surreal weight of an eyewitness from 2 millennia past standing in modern judgment. The bailiff intoned, Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? Matthew placed his calloused hand firmly on the book, his voice soft yet unwavering. I do, before the God who called me from my tax booth. He sat in the witness chair, carefully unfolding his scroll slightly, the parchment crinkling like whispers from the past. Sunlight caught the edges, illuminating faint ink marks of sacred words. The defense attorney approached with deep respect, voice warm. Matthew, your credentials? Matthew spoke soft-spoken, his eyes earnest and glistening with memory. I am Matthew, also called Levi, one of the 12 apostles chosen by Jesus himself. A former tax collector from Capernaum, despised by my own people, I left everything it is called to follow him. I authored the gospel bearing my name, written especially for my fellow Jews to show that Jesus is the promised Messiah, the fulfillment of our scriptures. The defense attorney pressed gently, describe Jesus' birth. Matthew's voice warmed with profound memory, his humble demeanor transforming as reverence filled his words, gesturing subtly as if reliving the wonder. He was born of the Virgin Mary in Bethlehem of Judea, during the days of Herod the king, fulfilling Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem, out of you shall come a governor who will shepherd my people Israel. This prophecy from Micah, written centuries earlier, predicted the Messiah would emerge from Bethlehem, David's humble hometown, linking Jesus eternally to Israel's royal line of promise. Wise men from the east, guided by a miraculous star, arrived to worship him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But King Herod, gripped by paranoid fear of a rival king, decreed the slaughter of all male children in Bethlehem 2 years old and under. An angel warned us in a dream, we fled to Egypt by night until Herod's death, returning only when it was safe. Thus was the child preserved, the Holy Family sheltered through divine protection. Spectators leaned in raptly, some crossing themselves fervently, tears glistening in believers' eyes at the vivid recounting of the sacred story, while others fidgeted in discomfort. The prosecutor surged forward for cross-examination, flipping pages noisily in her binder, her voice sharp and accusatory, a skeptical smirk curling her lips. Your genealogy contradicts Luke's. One traces through Joseph as legal father, the other differently. And there's no independent historical record of Herod's massacre of innocents, nor a worldwide census under Augustus requiring return to ancestral homes. Sounds like elaborate myth-making to force-fit prophecies, doesn't it? Matthew remained steadfast, his humble gaze unflinching, voice calm yet resolute. The genealogies, in ancient times, often emphasized legal inheritance or symbolic connections rather than strict biology, serve different purposes. One traces the legal line through Joseph as adoptive father, the other possibly the biological through Mary. Ancient genealogies prioritized royal legitimacy and theological meaning over modern biological precision. The census under Quirinius aligned with Roman practices, bringing Joseph to his ancestral Bethlehem. And the massacre, though tragically localized and thus not highlighted in broader Roman records, perfectly fits Herod the Great's well-documented paranoia and brutality. He murdered his own sons and wife out of fear. Historians like Josephus confirm his tyrannical violence. Such an act against perceived threats would scarcely surprise. These are truths etched in eyewitness memory, not tales spun from fancy. The prosecutor arched an eyebrow, her skeptical smirk deepening. No further questions. She returned to her seat amid a ripple of tense murmurs. Matthew carefully rolled his scroll and exited, head held high with quiet dignity, leaving the courtroom in a profound, reflective hush. The judge nodded solemnly, the witness is excused. The prosecutor turned to the judge, ready for her counter, her eyes gleaming with strategic triumph as she seized the moment. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Celsus. The doors burst open with a dramatic swing, admitting a figure of imperial arrogance. Celsus strode in, a haughty Greek philosopher draped in an immaculate white toga that flowed like conquered banners, his posture radiating superiority, a thick scroll clutched in one hand like a weapon of intellect. He entered with a swaggering gait, chin lifted in disdain, his sharp features twisted into a perpetual sardonic smirk. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, believers recoiled in outrage, skeptics nodded approvingly, while the air crackled with the audacity of this ancient critic invading sacred ground. The bailiff hesitated briefly, then extended the oath book, the tension thickening like storm clouds. The bailiff intoned firmly, "Do you swear to tell the truth?" Celsus snorted derisively, placing his hand on the book with mocking reluctance, his voice dripping with irony. "I do, though your gods may differ vastly from mine, and truth is ever elusive in matters of superstition." He settled into the witness chair with theatrical flair, unrolling his scroll dramatically, the parchment crackling like laughter in the stunned silence, as he leaned back, surveying the room like a conqueror appraising barbarians. The prosecutor approached confidently. "Celsus, your credentials?" Celsus flashed a sardonic smile, his tone laced with biting condescension. Celsus the Platonist, philosopher of the 2nd century AD, heir to the rational legacy of Greece and Rome. Author of The True Word, a devastatingly reasoned critique of Christianity, preserved, ironically, only through Origen's frantic rebuttal. I observed your nascent cult from the outside, with the clear eyes of philosophy unclouded by fanaticism. The prosecutor pressed, "What of the virgin birth?" Celsus leaned forward, laughing lightly, a sharp, mocking bark that echoed through the chamber, his eyes gleaming with triumphant scorn. A utter fabrication. Jesus was the illegitimate child of Mary and a Roman soldier named Panthera, a scandal hushed up with pious lies. Virgin births? Mere borrowed fables from far older myths. Your divine origin is as ancient and tawdry as Zeus's endless dalliances, impregnating mortals in golden showers, like with Danae to sire Perseus. Or Isis magically conceiving Horus from the dismembered Osiris, common tropes in Greco-Roman, the record stands clear and unassailable. But when we venture into the realm of miracles, resurrection, and divinity, we enter sacred territory where history's tools, and even the sharpest scholarship, reach their limit. I could not, in good conscience, declare those claims proven or disproven as matters of cold fact. They lie beyond what courts, or rigorous inquiry alone, can fully adjudicate. They demand a different kind of verdict, one rendered quietly in the depths of a person's own heart, mind, and soul. So this is what the ruling truly means. The historical Jesus stands firmly in the past, undeniable, influential, a pivot of human history. The Christ of faith, risen, divine, Lord, stands eternally in the present, inviting each of us to respond. The evidence we examined is real. It is weighty and profound. It has persuaded countless brilliant minds across centuries, from the earliest disciples risking everything to scholars like Wright and Craig today. It has also left equally brilliant minds, like Ehrman and Oppie, respectfully unconvinced. That enduring tension is not a flaw in the evidence, it is the very feature of questions that pierce the deepest parts of us, questions of meaning, hope, and eternity. I cannot tell you what to believe. No judge can. But I can say this, the door remains open. The record of this trial, the ancient prophecies, the eyewitness testimonies, the empty tomb, the radically transformed lives, the philosophical arguments, even the mysterious shroud, lies on the table for anyone willing to examine it with honesty and openness. Some will walk away persuaded beyond doubt that Jesus is exactly who he claimed to be. Others will see a profound but ultimately human story of inspiration and tragedy. And some will dwell in the honest ambiguity between, seeking still. All three responses are deeply human. All three are allowed. But none of us, having encountered the evidence, can ever claim the question was never asked. Thank you for bringing this case. It reminded me, and I hope it reminds you, that the most important verdicts are not proclaimed from a bench with thunderous authority, but quietly reached in the silence after the gavel falls, in the solitude of one's own soul. The judge offered a small, respectful nod into the emptiness, a gesture of gratitude and farewell. He stood slowly, walking the length of the room to switch off the courtroom lights one by one. Each click dimmed the space further, shadows lengthening gently until the grand chamber fell into peaceful, enveloping shadow. And so the trial ended, not with thunder or finality, but with an open door bathed in soft, inviting light, for all who seek. The end, 3D reconstructions rotating slowly, depth information encoded impossibly in a 2D surface, the man's form emerging in lifelike relief. Gasps echoed through the crowd as the 3D image rotated hauntingly, believers whispering in awe, skeptics wide-eyed in stunned silence, the room transfixed by the enigmatic relic's secrets unveiled. The courtroom fell hushed, eyes fixed on the glowing screen, the implications sinking in like a profound mystery. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, voice measured but probing. The 1988 carbon dating firmly placed it in the medieval period. Couldn't the image be an early form of proto-photography or a bas-relief rubbing technique? Paolo di Lazzaro countered calmly, advancing slides. The 1988 dating sampled contaminated repair threads post-fire damage. Rigorous new 2022 to 2025 studies, including wax, confirm approximately 2,000 years old. Attempted replicas, photography, acids, rubs, fail to match the superficial nanoscale coloration, lack of directionality, or true 3D encoding. No known medieval or modern method replicates all properties simultaneously. The prosecutor, no further. Paolo di Lazzaro shut down the projector with a soft beep, packing his equipment methodically, exiting amid lingering stunned silence, the haunting images etched in minds, questions unanswered. The judge, the witnesses excused. The courtroom remained charged with wonder as the screen went dark. The defense attorney rose smoothly, voice resonant. Your Honor, the defense calls Professor N.T. Wright. The doors opened with refined elegance, admitting a figure of distinguished scholarly grace. N.T. Wright entered, in clerical collar beneath a well-tailored suit, several weighty books tucked under one arm, his posture embodying British poise, upright, measured steps, a thoughtful smile softening his intelligent eyes. The crowd responded with quiet respect, historians and theologians leaning forward attentively, believers nodding in recognition of a familiar voice in the debate. The bailiff approached, oath book extended amid the contemplative hush. The bailiff, do you swear? N.T. Wright, I do. He sat composedly, placing his books on the stand with care, hands resting calmly as he prepared to weave history and theology. The defense attorney, your credentials? N.T. Wright spoke with articulate clarity, a gentle British cadence drawing listeners in. Research Professor Emeritus of New Testament and Early Christianity at the University of St. Andrews, former Bishop of Durham in the Church of England, author of over 80 books, including the comprehensive 817-page The Resurrection of the Son of God, exploring the historical and theological dimensions of early Christianity. The defense attorney, what is the most plausible explanation for early Christian belief in the resurrection? N.T. Wright leaned forward slightly, articulate and animated, gesturing expressively with his hands as ideas flowed like a masterful lecture. Early Christians proclaimed a bodily resurrection of one man in the middle of history, utterly unprecedented in Second Temple Judaism, where resurrection meant a general raising of all the righteous at the end of time, inaugurating God's kingdom. Yet these Jewish followers suddenly claimed it had happened to Jesus alone, mid-history, transforming their worldview overnight. The empty tomb, the multiple appearances to individuals and groups, the dramatic disciple transformation from cowering fear to fearless boldness, hallucinations or gradual legend cannot account for this radical mutation in Jewish resurrection belief, nor the explosive growth of a movement centered on a crucified Messiah. Only an actual, historical event fits the data. In Jewish thought, resurrection meant the physical raising of the dead at the end of history. For Christians to claim it happened to one person mid-history required extraordinary evidence, like the tomb empty and appearances reported. The crowd reflected deeply, many taking notes furiously, pens scratching paper as minds grappled with the historical paradigm shift described. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, voice pointed, "Isn't your conclusion inevitably influenced by personal faith as a bishop? And don't apparent contradictions in the gospel accounts undermine their reliability?" N.T. Wright responded with calm assurance, hands open in reasoned invitation. "My faith is shaped by the evidence, not the reverse. I employ standard historical methods used for any ancient event, criteria of multiple attestation, dissimilarity from expectations, and embarrassment, details unlikely to be invented. Variations in the accounts are hallmarks of genuine, independent eyewitness testimony. Perfect uniformity would suggest collusion or fabrication." The prosecutor paused briefly, no further. N.T. Wright gathered his books with a courteous nod to the court and exited gracefully, leaving a trail of thoughtful silence. The judge, the witness is excused. The courtroom settled into profound contemplation as the next witness prepared, the weight of historical mutation and bodily resurrection lingering like an unresolved symphony. The defense attorney rose with final resolve. "Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. William Lane Craig." The doors opened decisively, admitting a figure of poised intellectual authority. William Lane Craig entered, a philosopher in a sharp, well-fitted suit, his bearing confident and composed, eyes sharp with logical precision. His stride was steady and purposeful, exuding the calm assurance of countless debates won. The crowd leaned in, intrigued already, the shift to philosophical rigor promising a capstone to the resurrection evidence. The bailiff approached, oath book extended amid the expectant silence. The bailiff, do you swear? William Lane Craig, I do. He sat with focused composure, readying a flip chart at the stand, pages crisp and prepared. The defense attorney, your credentials? William Lane Craig responded with clear, authoritative tone, PhD in philosophy from the University of Birmingham, England, Th.D. In theology from the University of Munich, research professor of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology, founder of Reasonable Faith Ministry, author of numerous books on the historical resurrection and philosophical cosmology, including Reasonable Faith and the Kalam cosmological argument. The defense attorney, what are the key historical facts, and how does the Kalam cosmological argument relate? William Lane Craig stood confidently beside the flip chart, marker in hand, diagramming premises with precise strokes as his voice rang clear and compelling, leading historians across the spectrum accept three key facts: the empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances to disciples and skeptics, and the sudden origin of the disciples' belief in Jesus' resurrection, facts best explained by the literal resurrection hypothesis. Naturalistic alternatives fail philosophically and evidentially. Now, the Kalam cosmological argument provides the foundational context, a philosophical argument for God's existence. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began, therefore, it has a cause outside itself. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, supported by Big Bang cosmology and the impossibility of an actual infinite regress. Therefore, the universe has a cause, a timeless, immaterial, enormously powerful, personal God. This makes divine intervention in history, such as raising Jesus from the dead, rationally plausible rather than miraculous in violation of an uncaused universe. The Kalam argument, rooted in medieval Islamic philosophy but updated with modern science, demonstrates the universe isn't eternal but had a definite beginning, implying a transcendent creator outside time and space. He flipped the chart dramatically, clear diagrams of the Kalam premises in bold steps, alongside a vivid Big Bang timeline expanding from singularity to cosmic evolution, arrows emphasizing causation beyond the universe. The crowd leaned in, intrigued, eyes fixed on the logical flow, some nodding at the philosophical clarity, others furrowing brows in contemplation of cosmic origins. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, voice probing, don't quantum events occur without causes? And can't multiverse theories avoid an absolute beginning? William Lane Craig countered smoothly, pointing to the chart, quantum events have probabilistic causes within the system. Nothing truly comes from nothing. Multiverse hypotheses remain highly speculative and still require explanation for their own origin. The argument remains sound. The prosecutor, no further. William Lane Craig flipped the chart closed with a resonant snap and exited confidently, the philosophical framework resonating. The judge, the witness is excused. The defense attorney paused momentarily, surveying the courtroom, then declared with quiet finality, the defense rests its case. The room held its breath, the cumulative weight of prophecy, history, science, and philosophy settling like a heavy curtain as the prosecution prepared to respond. The judge looked toward the prosecution table, gavel resting lightly in hand. Prosecution, rebuttal? The prosecutor rose smoothly, voice clear and confident. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Dr. Sean Carroll for rebuttal. The doors opened with a casual push. Sean Carroll entered, a theoretical physicist in relaxed jeans and a blazer, laptop tucked under one arm, his stride easy and unhurried, a faint smile playing at his lips. He radiated the calm assurance of someone accustomed to debating cosmic questions on the biggest stages. The crowd stirred with fresh curiosity, believers bracing themselves, skeptics leaning forward eagerly, as the atmosphere shifted from ancient theology to cutting-edge physics. The bailiff approached, oath book extended amid the expectant hush. The bailiff, do you swear? Sean Carroll, I do. He sat comfortably, opening his laptop with a soft chime, fingers already flying across the keys as the projector hummed to life. The prosecutor, your credentials? Sean Carroll spoke in a relaxed, conversational tone, glancing up with a friendly nod. Theoretical physicist at Caltech, PhD from Harvard, author of The Big Picture and several books on cosmology and the nature of reality. I've debated Dr. Craig on God and cosmology, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the origin and structure of the universe. The prosecutor addressed the Kalam cosmological argument. Sean Carroll leaned into the laptop, projecting a stunning series of cosmic images, swirling galaxies, quantum foam, and elegant timelines, his voice calm yet incisive, cutting through the room like a laser. The Kalam argument oversimplifies the situation. Yes, the Big Bang marks the expansion of the universe from a hot, dense state, but it does not necessarily require an absolute beginning. Modern quantum cosmology offers models like the Hartle-Hawking no-boundary proposal, where the universe has a finite past without a sharp edge or starting point. Time itself emerges smoothly from a quantum state. Causality as we know it only makes sense within space-time. There's no reason to assume it applies before the universe, because before may not even exist. The Big Bang describes the universe's expansion, but quantum physics allows for models where the universe has no singular beginning, avoiding the need for a first cause outside itself. Projected visuals filled the courtroom. A beautiful cosmic timeline curving into a smooth quantum boundary, elegant diagrams of the no-boundary proposal, and colorful multiverse inflation models. The crowd let out a collective ooh as the images rotated and expanded, believers shifting uncomfortably, skeptics nodding with admiration, the room alive with the wonder of cosmic possibilities. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, voice steady. What about the fine-tuning of physical constants and the extraordinarily low entropy start of the universe? Sean Carroll smiled lightly, advancing to a slide of inflationary multiverse landscapes. Fine-tuning and low entropy are explained naturally by inflationary cosmology and the multiverse. Vast numbers of universes with different constants mean ours is simply one that supports life. It's a statistical inevitability, not evidence of design. The defense attorney, no further. Sean Carroll closed his laptop with a gentle snap and exited casually, leaving the courtroom buzzing with the scale of cosmic possibilities. The judge, the witness is excused. The prosecution prepared to call its next rebuttal witness, the cosmic visuals from Carroll's testimony still fading from the screen, leaving minds expanded yet unsettled by quantum possibilities. The prosecutor rose once more, voice measured. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Dr. Graham Oppy. The doors opened with scholarly calm. Graham Oppy entered, an Australian philosopher in a neat suit, notes clutched in hand, his demeanor thoughtful and unflappable, eyes behind glasses conveying deep metaphysical reflection. His stride was steady, exuding the quiet confidence of one who navigates abstract arguments with ease. The crowd pondered already, sensing a shift to pure philosophy, the room's energy turning introspective. The bailiff approached, oath book extended amid the contemplative atmosphere. The bailiff, do you swear? Graham Oppy, I do. He sat composedly, arranging his notes with precise care. The prosecutor, your credentials? Graham Oppy spoke in a clear Australian accent, analytical yet approachable. Professor of philosophy at Monash University, PhD from Princeton University, author of Arguing About Gods and numerous works offering rigorous critiques of theistic arguments. The prosecutor, does the Kalam cosmological argument succeed? Graham Oppy leaned forward slightly, voice calm and incisively analytical, dissecting the premises like a surgeon. No, it does not. The argument equivocates on the phrase begins to exist, using it inconsistently. In everyday cases, like a chair beginning when wood is assembled, it differs profoundly from the universe allegedly beginning ex nihilo. Actual infinities are metaphysically possible, no logical contradiction in an infinite past or series. Even granting a cause, there's no justification for making it personal rather than an impersonal brute fact, adding personality is ad hoc. Equivocation means using a term inconsistently. Here, begins to exist applies differently to everyday objects versus the entire universe. The crowd pondered deeply, murmurs rippling through the benches, heads tilting in contemplation, some scribbling notes as the philosophical precision challenged intuitive assumptions. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, voice probing. Isn't the intuition that something cannot come from nothing profoundly absurd? Graham Oppy responded evenly, unflinching. Intuitions often fail in deep metaphysics. Our everyday experiences don't scale to ultimate reality. Naturalism suffices. The universe or its fundamental laws can be a brute fact, no more in need of explanation than a personal God would be. The defense attorney, no further. Graham Oppy gathered his notes methodically and exited calmly, leaving the courtroom in thoughtful silence, the metaphysical rebuttal echoing unresolved. The prosecutor stood with finality, rebuttal complete. The prosecution rests. The judge nodded thoughtfully as both sides settled, the full weight of evidence and counterarguments now laid bare, the courtroom poised for closing statements, the air thick with unresolved tension, every spectator on the edge of their seat. The judge's voice cut through the hush. We move to closing arguments. Prosecution first. The prosecutor rose with deliberate grace, buttoning her jacket sharply before pacing dramatically across the floor, heels echoing like measured judgments, her gestures slicing the air as her voice built from steady resolve to a passionate crescendo that filled the chamber. Your Honor, this case rests on extraordinary claims, that a first-century Jewish teacher was God incarnate, performed miracles defying nature, died as atonement, and rose bodily from the dead, claims that, if true, would upend everything we know about history, science, and reality itself. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the defense has fallen far short. We have shown that the biblical accounts are late, anonymous, contradictory in key details, birth narratives, tangled genealogies, varying resurrection appearances, and shaped by theological agendas rather than neutral reporting. Prophecies were retrofitted, reinterpreted from Jewish scriptures taken out of context to fit a later story. Miracles lack any contemporary corroboration outside biased circles and bear striking parallels to pagan myths and legendary embellishment across cultures. The crucifixion is historical, yes, a shameful execution of a failed messianic claimant under Roman law, not cosmic divine atonement. The empty tomb? Likely a later legend, Paul's earliest writings, closest to the events, omitted entirely. Appearances are better explained by grief-induced visions, cognitive dissonance rattling the mind, and the deep human need to find meaning in tragedy. The transformation of disciples proves only sincere belief, not objective fact. History overflows with martyrs who died for falsehoods they held as truth. The Shroud of Turin, paraded as physical proof, remains deeply contested, carbon dated to the medieval period, despite contested redatings, with image formation theories from artistic techniques to unknown natural processes. No scholarly consensus places it in the 1st century or ties it conclusively to resurrection energy. Finally, the Kalam cosmological argument, intended to forge a divine context, crumbles on both philosophical and scientific grounds. Modern cosmology offers models without absolute beginnings, causality may not apply beyond space-time, and even if a cause exists, there's no justification for identifying it as the personal, triune God of Christianity who intervenes in history. The defense asks you to accept ancient hearsay, biased testimony, and speculative philosophy over critical reason, rigorous historical methodology, and scientific caution. We ask only that you require evidence commensurate with the magnitude of these claims. We respectfully submit that the claims of Jesus Christ's divinity and literal bodily resurrection are not proven, they remain matters of faith, not verifiable historical or scientific fact. The prosecution rests. She sat abruptly, the courtroom tense, murmurs rippling like waves, skeptics nodding in agreement, believers shifting uncomfortably as doubt's shadow lengthened. Without pause, the defense attorney stood tall, voice booming with fervent passion, arms gesturing broadly like a conductor rallying an orchestra, eyes locking intensely on the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution has spent this trial telling you what the evidence cannot prove, but they have offered no compelling alternative that explains the totality of the data, leaving a vacuum where explanation should reside. We have presented a cumulative case, a mosaic of converging lines, that points unmistakably to one conclusion: Jesus of Nazareth lived, boldly claimed divinity, died by crucifixion, and rose bodily from the dead, vindicating those claims beyond reasonable doubt. Eyewitnesses and early sources, friend and foe alike, from apostles to Tacitus and Josephus, attest to his existence, wonderful works, crucifixion under Pilate, and the unquenchable proclamation of resurrection. The empty tomb, discovered by women, a detail embarrassing in ancient culture, thus unlikely invented, was never refuted by producing a body despite every incentive. Postmortem appearances, to individuals, groups, even skeptics like James and Paul, transformed fearful deserters into bold martyrs willing to die. The explosive birth of a messianic movement centered on a crucified man as Lord is historically inexplicable without the resurrection. No Jewish expectation prepared them for this, no psychological or sociological model adequately accounts for it. Scholars across the spectrum, Habermas, Wright, even many skeptics, accept the core facts requiring explanation. The best inference is the one the disciples proclaimed: God raised Jesus. The Shroud of Turin, while not definitive proof, provides intriguing physical corroboration: real blood from authentic trauma, an image formed by means unexplained by medieval or modern technology, requiring energy levels suggesting a burst of light and power consistent with resurrection. The Kalam cosmological argument, powerfully defended and unchallenged in its core logic, establishes a universe with a beginning demanding a transcendent, personal cause, making divine action in history, including miracles and resurrection, rationally plausible rather than impossible. The prosecution's alternatives, legend developing over decades, when creeds emerge within years, collective hallucinations, failing to explain group visions or the empty tomb, or medieval forgery, require far more leaps of faith than accepting the resurrection hypothesis. History does not coerce belief, but it presents evidence that demands a verdict. The facts thunder unmistakably to the truth proclaimed for 2 millennia: Jesus Christ is Lord, risen from the dead, the divine Son of God who offers forgiveness and eternal life to all who trust in Him. We ask the court to recognize that the weight of historical, scientific, and philosophical evidence supports the historicity of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, and with it, His claim to divinity. The defense rests. The courtroom erupted in murmurs after the closings, applause stifled, whispers exploding, emotions raw as final arguments clashed in minds like thunder. The judge raised his hand for silence, then paused dramatically, reviewing thick notes with deliberate slowness. The room held its breath, every spectator frozen, hearts pounding in unison, the air thick with the gravity of what was to come, centuries of debate distilled into this single moment. In his voice grave and measured, resonating with judicial authority yet touched by personal reflection, the judge finally spoke. After thorough deliberation on all testimony, evidence, arguments, and rebuttals, from ancient prophets and apostles to modern physicists and philosophers, the court rules as follows. On the historicity of Jesus Christ, the court finds, by a clear preponderance of the evidence, that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure who lived in first-century Judea, taught as an itinerant Jewish preacher, attracted a significant following, was crucified under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius circa AD 30, and died on the cross. This conclusion is supported by broad scholarly consensus, independent non-Christian sources like Josephus and Tacitus, and the reliable historical cores within the Gospels. On the supernatural claims, miracles, divinity, and bodily resurrection, the court finds these inconclusive and ultimately beyond judicial jurisdiction. The defense's cumulative case is compelling: early creeds within years of the events, diverse appearances, disciple transformations, the mysterious shroud, and the logical force of the Kalam argument. Naturalistic alternatives strain credulity. Yet the prosecution effectively highlighted textual biases, historical gaps, mythic parallels, and scientific counters. Miracles, by nature, defy ordinary empirical verification. The court cannot, and should not, rule on matters of divinity. These transcend the tools of law and history, they are questions of ultimate faith, conscience, and personal conviction. Historicity affirmed. Supernatural claims, no ruling. Case closed. The gavel banged, final, resounding, a thunderclap that shattered the breathless silence. The courtroom exploded in immediate, chaotic reactions, thunderous applause from believers surging to their feet, sharp boos and gasps from skeptics, whispers erupting into heated debates, reporters scrambling as emotions overflowed the bounds of decorum. The judge raised his voice firmly over the din. Order. Court adjourned. The gavel struck once more, but the echoes of the verdict, and the questions it left open, lingered long after the room began to empty. Epilogue, the judge's private reflection. The last echoes of footsteps faded into nothingness. The massive doors thudded shut with a final, resonant boom, sealing the chamber in solitude. The spectator benches stood deserted, scattered papers fluttering slightly in the draft, half-empty water glasses catching the dying light like abandoned relics of a fierce, protracted battle. The judge, now utterly alone in the vast room, slowly removed his black robe, the fabric whispering as it slid from his shoulders. He folded it with deliberate care over the back of his chair, revealing a simple shirt and tie, the attire of an ordinary man beneath the mantle of authority. He did not return to the elevated bench of judgment. Instead, he sat on its lower edge, almost at eye level with the empty room, his posture relaxed yet weighted with reflection. He gazed out into the shadowed space, as if addressing the invisible originator of this extraordinary case, his voice soft and reflective, carrying a faint, knowing smile. You know, in all my years on the bench, I've never presided over a case quite like this one. No statutes were violated, no damages claimed, no sentence to impose. Yet the stakes felt higher, infinitely higher, than any trial I've ever conducted, touching the very core of human existence. The verdict I rendered is, at its heart, a humble recognition of boundaries. History can speak with confidence about a remarkable Jewish teacher from Nazareth who lived, taught profound truths, stirred unstoppable controversy, and was executed by Rome. The evidence for that is as solid as for any ancient figure we accept without question, Socrates, Alexander, or Caesar. On that and Egyptian lore, recycled to lend credibility to your upstart sect. The crowd gasped in collective shock, some chuckled nervously at the audacious blasphemy, others clutched crosses in fury, the room buzzing with outrage and uneasy amusement as believers whispered prayers and skeptics suppressed smirks. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his voice steady and unflinching amid the chaos. You acknowledge Jesus' existence and his reputed deeds, though? Celsus leaned back dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting away an insect. Existence? Yes, a mere man, perhaps. Deeds? Sorcery picked up in Egypt, clever tricks and illusions, not divinity. Your miracles are street magic elevated to mythology. The defense attorney held his ground briefly, no further. Celsus rolled his scroll with a triumphant flourish, rising and exiting with a lingering smirk, his toga swirling like a victor departing the arena, leaving scandal and division in his wake. The judge banged the gavel sharply to restore order. The witness is excused. Chapter 3, The Teacher and His Wonders, Ministry and Miracles, circa AD 27-30. The courtroom buzzed intensely as the phase shifted, the air charged with controversy from Celsus' biting mockery. The defense attorney rose purposefully, his voice cutting through the unrest like a steady anchor. Your Honor, the defense calls Luke the physician. The doors opened with a measured creak, admitting a figure of quiet scholarship and purpose. Luke entered, a scholarly man in simple, flowing robes of undyed linen, a worn leather medical satchel slung over his shoulder and a thick scroll cradled in his arm. His steps were purposeful and unhurried, his expression thoughtful and composed, exuding the calm precision of a healer accustomed to crises. The crowd stirred anew, believers watched with hopeful anticipation, skeptics eyed him warily, and the scent of ancient parchment seemed to waft through the modern chamber. The bailiff approached, extending the oath book, the room falling into expectant hush. The bailiff intoned, "Do you swear to tell the truth?" Luke placed his hand steadily on the book, his voice clear and sincere, "I do, by the great physician himself." He sat in the witness chair, carefully opening his scroll with a soft rustle that echoed faintly, the aged pages catching the light as he prepared to recount histories meticulously gathered. The defense attorney approached with evident respect. "Your credentials?" Luke spoke with scholarly poise, eyes meeting the court's. "I am Luke, a Gentile physician and faithful companion to the Apostle Paul on his journeys. Author of the Gospel bearing my name and the Acts of the Apostles, compiled from careful investigations and interviews with eyewitnesses, that an accurate account might be known." Luke 1:1-4. The defense attorney nodded encouragingly. "What miracles did Jesus perform during his ministry?" Luke's voice rang clear and authoritative, gesturing deliberately as if recounting diagnoses to anxious patients, his words painting vivid scenes that transported the courtroom. At a wedding in Cana, he turned water to fine wine when the jars stood empty, his first sign, revealing his glory. He healed the blind, restoring sight with a touch or word, and the lame, making them leap for joy. He raised Lazarus from the dead after 4 days in the tomb, calling him forth bound in grave clothes, the stench of death yielding to life. He calmed raging storms on the Sea of Galilee with a mere rebuke, "Peace, be still!" exclamation marked the winds and waves obeying instantly. Over 30 such recorded acts, demonstrating sovereign authority over nature, illness, demons, and even death itself, attributes belonging to God alone. These miracles weren't mere acts of kindness, they symbolized Jesus' power over creation's brokenness, fulfilling Old Testament promises of a coming healer and restorer who would make the deaf hear, the blind see, and the dead rise. Spectators whispered fervently, some wide-eyed in wonder as the miracles unfolded in their imaginations, the room alive with hushed awe and disbelief. The prosecutor rose swiftly for cross-examination, tapping her pen sharply against her notepad, a rhythmic, impatient click that punctuated the tension, her voice laced with doubt. These Gospels were written decades later, anonymously at first, with traditions circulating orally. Contradictions in miracle details across accounts, surely exaggerations born of legend? Luke remained unflinchingly calm, his physician's steadiness shining through. "My account draws from direct eyewitness reports and thorough investigation. I sought accuracy from the start. Minor variations are marks of authenticity, like different perspectives on the same event from multiple witnesses. Eyewitness accounts often vary in details because people recall events differently under stress or from unique angles, but that doesn't invalidate the main facts. It's a sign of genuine, uncollated testimony, not fabricated harmony." The prosecutor paused, pen tapping once more before stilling. "No further." She returned to her seat amid lingering whispers. Luke gathered his satchel and scroll with deliberate care, exiting with the same purposeful grace, leaving the courtroom reverberating with the echo of wonders. The judge nodded. "The witness is excused." The prosecutor turned to the judge, poised for her next challenge, her eyes sharp with anticipation as the echoes of miraculous accounts still hung in the air like fading thunder. She rose smoothly, voice firm and commanding. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Dr. Richard Carrier." The doors opened with modern precision, admitting a figure of contemporary intellectual assurance. Richard Carrier entered confidently, a modern historian in a crisp, tailored suit that spoke of academic battles won, briefcase gripped firmly in hand, his stride purposeful and unflinching. Bespectacled and composed, he scanned the room with analytical eyes that seemed to dissect every gaze. The crowd stirred restlessly, Believers shifted in discomfort, some already scoffing under their breath. Skeptics leaned forward with keen interest, as the shift from ancient wonders to rigorous doubt electrified the atmosphere. The bailiff approached, oath book in hand, the room's tension coiling tighter. The bailiff, do you swear to tell the truth? Richard Carrier placed his hand on the book without hesitation. I do. He sat at the stand, opening his briefcase with a sharp snap that echoed like a challenge, spreading notes and books before him, a fortress of evidence ready for deployment. The prosecutor, Dr. Carrier, your credentials? Richard Carrier spoke with clear, confident authority, Ph.D. in ancient history from Columbia University. Independent scholar and author of On the Historicity of Jesus, Why We Might Have Reason for Doubt, a peer-reviewed proponent of the Christ myth theory, the view that Jesus may not have existed historically but started as a mythical or celestial figure. The prosecutor, were Jesus' miracles real historical events? Richard Carrier leaned forward, analytical and unflinching, gesturing precisely to his notes as his voice cut through with scholarly precision, unlikely in the extreme. No contemporary records exist outside biased, later Christian sources. These stories bear striking parallels to earlier myths, like Apollonius of Tyana, the first-century sage who reportedly performed healings, exorcisms, and resurrections, or Osiris, resurrected in ancient Egyptian lore after dismemberment. Jesus may have started as a celestial figure in Jewish mysticism, envisioned in heavenly realms through visions and scriptures, later historicized into earthly tales by early followers. The Christ myth theory suggests Jesus began as a spiritual being in visions or scriptures, similar to how some ancient gods were historicized over time, rather than starting as a real person. The crowd stirred visibly, some scoffing openly in disbelief, others murmuring thoughtful agreement, the room fracturing with intellectual unrest. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, standing resolute, but historians like Josephus and Tacitus confirm his existence. Isn't the mythicist view a fringe position in scholarship? Richard Carrier responded coolly, pointing to a page in his notes. Josephus' passages are likely interpolated, meaning later additions or alterations by Christian copyists, by eager scribes seeking to bolster the faith. Tacitus merely reports second-hand rumors from Christians in Rome. Historicity grants a minimal itinerant preacher at best. Divinity and miracles remain pure fiction. Interpolation means later Christian scribes added or altered text to support their beliefs, a common issue in ancient manuscripts. The defense attorney, no further questions. Richard Carrier snapped his briefcase shut with decisive finality, a sharp crack that punctuated his points, and exited confidently, leaving ripples of debate and doubt. The judge checked his notes thoughtfully, the gavel tapping lightly as the phase ended, the courtroom's energy shifting once more. Chapter 4, The Day of Sorrows, Death on the Cross, circa AD 30. The defense attorney rose with resolute determination, voice echoing firmly, Your Honor, the defense calls Flavius Josephus. The doors open with dignified gravity, revealing a figure of scholarly gravitas. Flavius Josephus entered, a learned Jew in fine Roman attire blending toga edges with priestly heritage, a thick scroll tucked under his arm like a chronicle of survival. His poise was that of a seasoned historian, measured steps, eyes reflecting the scars of war and wisdom. The courtroom hushed in anticipation, believers hopeful for external corroboration, skeptics wary of ancient bias. The bailiff approached solemnly, oath book extended. The bailiff, do you swear? Flavius Josephus, I do, by the God of my fathers. He sat, carefully unrolling his scroll with a soft parchment rustle that carried through the silent room. The defense attorney, your credentials? Flavius Josephus spoke with calm authority, I am Flavius Josephus, born AD 37 in Jerusalem, of priestly descent. Fought in the Jewish revolt against Rome, later became Roman citizen under Vespasian. Author of Antiquities of the Jews and the Jewish War, primary sources chronicling 1st century Judea for Roman audiences. The defense attorney, describe Jesus' death. Flavius Josephus read from his scroll in a steady, reflective tone, voice carrying the weight of impartial record. Jesus was a wise man, if one ought to call him a man. He was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of those who accept the truth gladly. Pilate condemned him to the cross at the suggestion of our principal men. Those who loved him did not cease, for he appeared to them alive again the third day. As a Jewish historian writing for Roman audiences, I documented this to explain the rise of Christianity, drawing from official records and oral traditions. The courtroom fell into profound silence, spectators absorbing the words of a non-Christian source with wide-eyed gravity, believers nodding in vindication, skeptics shifting uncomfortably. The prosecutor rose aggressively for cross-examination, pointing accusingly like a prosecutor unveiling forgery. Your text was altered by Christian copyists, parts read like inserted creeds, unnaturally praising him as more than man. And no mention of miracles as divine? Flavius Josephus remained calm, unflinching. The core account is authentic, the execution under Pilate is historical fact, corroborated across sources. Even if some phrases were embellished later, the basic report of Jesus' crucifixion and the movement's persistence aligns with other Roman and Jewish records. The prosecutor, no further. She sat sharply. Flavius Josephus rolled his scroll methodically and exited with quiet dignity. The judge, the witness is excused. The prosecutor rose immediately. Your Honor, the prosecution calls Cornelius Tacitus. The doors opened with imperial formality. Cornelius Tacitus entered, a stern Roman senator in pristine toga, his bearing rigid with aristocratic disdain, expression cold and judgmental. His stride was haughty, eyes sweeping the room like a patrician surveying inferiors. The crowd exchanged uneasy glances, the shift to Roman contempt palpable. The bailiff, do you swear? Tacitus, I do, by the gods of Rome. He sat, expression disdainful, arms folded imperiously. The prosecutor, your credentials? Tacitus spoke coldly, I am Cornelius Tacitus, Roman senator and historian, AD 56 to 120. Author of Annals, chronicling the empire from Tiberius to Nero. The prosecutor, what of the crucifixion? Tacitus recited with precise, chilling detachment, Christus, founder of the name Christians, suffered the extreme penalty during Tiberius' reign at the hands of Procurator Pontius Pilate. This pernicious superstition, checked for the moment, broke out again not only in Judea but even in Rome. As a Roman official, I viewed Christianity as a harmful cult, but my records confirm the historical execution based on imperial reports. Spectators exchanged uneasy glances, the Roman scorn for the superstition hanging heavy. The defense attorney cross-examined steadily, so you confirm the execution and the movement's origin? Superstition to Rome, but truth to many? Tacitus replied icily, to us, a mischief, persecuted accordingly under Nero. The defense attorney, no further. Tacitus rose and exited with a haughty stride, toga billowing like imperial judgment. The judge, the witness is excused. The face closed with a sharp gavel tap, the courtroom reverberating with the gravity of external historical confirmation. Chapter 5, The Silent Tomb, Burial and Empty Tomb, circa AD 30. The defense attorney rose with unyielding resolve, voice booming, Your Honor, the defense calls the Apostle Paul. The doors creaked open with ominous weight, admitting a figure of raw intensity. Paul entered, a fierce man marked by visible scars hinting at beatings, shipwrecks, and persecutions endured, his wrists bound in symbolic chains that clinked softly with each step, evoking the trials that forged his unbreakable faith. His eyes burned with unquenchable conviction, posture tall despite the bonds. The crowd leaned in, captivated already, believers inspired by his zeal, skeptics intrigued by this transformed persecutor. The bailiff approached cautiously, oath book extended amid the charged silence. The bailiff, do you swear? Paul, I do, before the living Christ who appeared to me. He sat powerfully, eyes blazing as chains rested on the stand. The defense attorney, your credentials? Paul declared with thunderous passion, I am Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, Pharisee trained under Gamaliel, zealous persecutor of the church until my encounter with the risen Jesus on the Damascus road, a blinding light and voice that shattered my world, turning enemy into apostle. Author of 13 New Testament epistles, spreading the gospel amid suffering. The defense attorney, what of the burial and tomb? Paul's voice thundered like a sermon reborn, rising with fervor as he leaned forward, chains rattling for emphasis. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, was buried, and raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then to over 500 brothers at once, most still alive to testify, and last of all to me, the least, 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. This ancient creed, passed to me within years of the events, summarizes the core shared among the first believers: burial proving true death, appearances proving resurrection life. The crowd leaned in, utterly captivated, wide-eyed wonder and hushed reverence filling the room. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, voice sharp, your earliest creed in 1 Corinthians amidst the empty tomb entirely. Were these appearances mere hallucinations? Paul countered unflinchingly, eyes flashing, the creed I received within years of the crucifixion, from the Jerusalem apostles themselves. My own vision transformed me from violent enemy to tireless apostle. Hallucinations don't explain such radical change, nor group appearances to hundreds. Visions in ancient contexts were seen as real encounters, but my transformation from persecutor to promoter shows something objective, undeniable happened. The prosecutor, no further. Paul stood tall and exited, chains clinking rhythmically like a defiant march, leaving the courtroom electrified. The judge, the witness is excused. The prosecutor turned swiftly, Your Honor, the prosecution calls Dr. Gert Ludman. The doors opened calmly. Gert Ludman entered, a thoughtful academic with a distinctive German accent implied in his precise diction, carrying a stack of books like scholarly armor. His demeanor was reflective and measured, eyes behind glasses conveying intellectual depth. The crowd murmured in debate already, sensing the counterpoint. The bailiff, do you swear? Gert Ludman, I do. He sat, arranging his books neatly. The prosecutor, your credentials? Gert Ludman, former professor of New Testament at the University of Göttingen, author of The Resurrection of Jesus, History, Experience, Theology. The prosecutor, was the tomb empty? Gert Ludman spoke thoughtfully, gesturing to his books, likely a later legend. Crucified criminals were often left unburied or thrown in common mass graves under Roman practice. The appearances? Subjective visions born of profound grief and cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension when beliefs clash with reality, often leading people to rationalize contradictions, among devoted followers. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological term for the discomfort when beliefs clash with reality, leading people to reinterpret events to reduce tension, like turning a failed Messiah into a risen one. Spectators murmured in heated debate, some nodding thoughtfully, others shaking heads in rejection. The defense attorney cross-examined, but Jewish authorities claimed the body was stolen, admitting the tomb was empty. Doesn't that support the fact? Gert Ludman, that's a Christian polemic, rhetorical argument against opponents. In Matthew, invented to counter Jewish accusations, not historical fact. The defense attorney, no further. Gerrit Ludemann exited calmly with his books. The judge, the witness is excused. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the phase ended, shadows lengthening and tension building palpably, the debate over death and life hanging unresolved. Chapter 6, The Light That Dawned, Resurrection and Appearances, circa AD 30. The defense attorney rose with confident energy. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Gary Habermas. The doors opened smoothly, admitting a figure of warm scholarly enthusiasm. Dr. Gary Habermas entered, a genial professor with a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in a comfortable suit, arms laden with rolled charts, thick books, and folders brimming with research. His stride was purposeful yet approachable, a broad smile lighting his face as he nodded to familiar faces in the crowd. The atmosphere shifted to one of engaged curiosity, spectators straightened, ready for data-driven clarity amid the emotional testimonies. The bailiff approached with the oath book, the room settling into attentive focus. The bailiff, do you swear? Gary Habermas raised his hand cheerfully. I do. He sat at the stand, eagerly spreading his notes and charts across the surface with organized excitement, the papers rustling like pages turning in a compelling lecture. The defense attorney, your credentials? Gary Habermas responded warmly, voice inviting and authoritative, distinguished research professor at Liberty University, PhD from Michigan State University, author of over 40 books on the historical Jesus and resurrection, including the widely used The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, works grounded in decades of scholarly research and dialogue. The defense attorney, what evidence supports the resurrection? Gary Habermas leaned forward with infectious enthusiasm, eyes sparkling as he pointed animatedly to his charts, now projected large on the courtroom screen, crisp graphs and percentages glowing vividly. We use the minimal facts approach, facts accepted by most scholars, even skeptics, data agreed upon by about 75% or more of critical experts, regardless of personal belief. These include Jesus' death by crucifixion, near universal consensus, the empty tomb discovered by women, whose testimony was culturally embarrassing, thus likely authentic, post-mortem appearances to disciples and even skeptics like James and Paul, and the sudden, dramatic transformation of those disciples from fearful deserters into bold proclaimers willing to die for their conviction. These facts are best explained by the literal resurrection, alternatives like hallucinations, which don't account for group experiences, or theft, no body produced despite Roman/Jewish incentives, simply fail to explain all the data comprehensively. The minimal facts method focuses only on data agreed upon by most experts, regardless of belief, to build a strong, unbiased case. Projected charts illuminated the room, minimal facts boldly titled, bar graphs showing high scholarly acceptance percentages with citations from sources like Habermas surveys and peer-reviewed studies. The crowd examined the projections intently, many nodding thoughtfully, believers with affirmation, even some skeptics with intrigued acknowledgement, as the data's weight settled. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, voice probing. Scholars debate these facts vigorously. Alternatives like the swoon theory, Jesus surviving crucifixion, or body theft remain viable explanations, don't they? Gary Habermas responded calmly yet enthusiastically, gesturing to a counter chart. They collapse under scrutiny. Roman executioners were professionals, spearing ensured death. A swoon victim couldn't roll away a multi-ton stone or inspire worship. Guards at a sealed tomb, incentives to produce the body, yet none appeared. Hallucinations don't explain diverse group appearances, 500 at once, or the empty tomb simultaneously. The prosecutor paused briefly, no further. Gary Habermas gathered his charts and books with a warm nod to the court, exiting amid appreciative murmurs. The judge, the witness is excused. The courtroom hummed with reflection as the projections faded, the minimal facts charts dissolving into darkness, leaving minds wrestling with scholarly consensus on resurrection evidence. The defense attorney rose once more, voice steady and anticipatory. "Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Paolo Di Lazzaro." The doors open with precise efficiency, admitting a figure of modern scientific authority. Paolo Di Lazzaro entered, an Italian researcher in a crisp lab coat over a tailored suit, carrying a sleek laptop and sealed sample cases with careful grip. His demeanor was professional yet passionate, eyes bright with the thrill of discovery as he nodded politely. The crowd stirred curiously, the shift to empirical science heightening intrigue after philosophical debates. The bailiff approached, oath book ready amid the expectant hush. The bailiff: "Do you swear?" Paolo Di Lazzaro: "I do." He moved to the stand with focused energy, swiftly setting up a projector, cables connecting with soft clicks, the hum of the device filling the room as the screen illuminated expectantly. The defense attorney: "Your credentials?" Paolo Di Lazzaro spoke with clear Italian-inflected English, gesturing confidently. Senior researcher and head of the Excimer Laser Laboratory at Enia Research Center in Frascati, Italy. Led multi-year studies on the Shroud of Turin's image formation. The defense attorney: "What have your studies on the Shroud of Turin revealed?" Paolo Di Lazzaro activated the projector with a decisive click, high-resolution images blooming on the massive screen as his voice rose with scientific fervor. "Our experiments with vacuum ultraviolet lasers replicated the shroud's superficial yellowish coloration, oxidation/dehydration limited to 200 to 500 nanometers depth, no pigments, dyes, or heat damage deeper in the fibers. The full-body image, front and back, requires a short, intense burst of vacuum ultraviolet radiation equivalent to 34 trillion watts of power, far beyond any modern laser technology. Recent wax staining, wide-angle X-ray scattering, a modern scientific technique used to analyze the shroud's fabric without damaging it, places the linen in the 1st century AD. Bloodstains are real human blood, type AB, with bilirubin and trauma markers consistent with severe scourging, crown of thorns wounds, and crucifixion, aligning precisely with gospel accounts. The shroud is a linen cloth believed by some to be Jesus' burial wrap. Our tests show the image isn't paint, scorch, or burn marks but something akin to a controlled radiation burst, defying known natural or artificial explanations." Projected images dominated the courtroom, full view of the faint shroud figure, the striking photographic negative revealing a clear positive face, close-ups of authentic blood rivulets and wounds, and stunning